The lobby of Whitmore Corp was a cathedral of wealth, all polished marble and gleaming glass. Sunlight streamed through the towering windows, making the floor shine like a frozen lake. Men and women in expensive suits moved with a sharp, hurried confidence, their heels clicking out a rhythm of ambition. Maya Lopez moved among them like a ghost in a simple blouse and dark slacks. Her temporary staff badge was a mark of invisibility, a signal to the powerful that she was not one of them. She kept her head down, her dark hair shielding her face, her mind a fortress no one could see into. No one here knew she had walked the historic halls of Harvard Law on a full scholarship just a few years before. They didn't know that behind her quiet eyes, a mind was constantly observing, cataloging details, the nervous tick of an executive before a big meeting, the subtle wear on another's $1,000 shoes. It wasn't envy, it was analysis. A habit she'd honed in lecture halls and mock trials. Here, she was just a temp, organizing files and answering phones, forgettable and transient. That was her armor. Near the back service elevator, her father, Javier, was carefully polishing a brass railing that ran alongside the grand staircase. His hands, worn and calloused from 20 years of service in this very building, moved with a gentle, practiced pride. He was a fixture, part of the building itself, yet most executives looked right through him. An older secretary gave him a warm smile and a "Good morning, Javier," which he returned with genuine appreciation. A moment later, a young executive nearly knocked him over while rushing for the elevator, not even offering a glance of apology. It was a daily reminder of his place in this world. A hush fell as the CEO, Charles Whitmore, stepped onto a small stage. He was in his 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and a smile that seemed engineered for shareholder meetings. He tapped the microphone. "Good morning, Whitmore family," he began, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. "Here at Whitmore, we value two things above all else: accountability and innovation. Every single person in this building, from the boardroom to the mailroom, is a vital cog in our great machine." He spoke of market shares and a future so bright it was blinding, painting a picture of a benevolent corporate family. Maya listened not to the rehearsed words, but to the hollow spaces between them. She saw the executives in the front row nodding, their faces perfect masks of agreement. The speech ended with a round of polite applause. As the crowd began to move, Maya walked past a small, secluded alcove where two vice presidents were talking in low, urgent voices. They were so consumed they didn't notice her presence. "He wants the quarterly reports adjusted before the board meeting," one said, his voice tight with stress. "The numbers from the Phoenix project just don't add up. We're in the red." The other one shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "It's too risky this time. We're not just fudging projections, we're talking about off-book finances, moving major assets to a shell corporation to hide the losses. If an auditor ever looks closely..." They stopped talking abruptly as a colleague approached them, the conversation dissolving into pleasantries. But Maya had heard enough. She kept walking toward her cubicle, her face betraying nothing. Off-book finances. Shell corporations. A crack had just appeared in the polished marble facade of Whitmore Corp, and she felt like she was the only one who had seen it. A week later, the call that every child dreads came. Maya was in her small cubicle, staring at a spreadsheet of meaningless numbers when her phone buzzed. It was her father's name. A cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello." It was a nurse from the local hospital, her tone calm but firm. There had been an accident at work. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She mumbled something to her supervisor and was out the door in seconds, the sounds of the office fading behind her. At the emergency room, she found Javier lying in a stark white bed, his arm encased in a heavy plaster cast and a long, stitched gash running over his eyebrow. He looked frail and diminished under the harsh fluorescent lights. In a weak, pained voice, he told her what had happened. He had been ordered by his supervisor to clean a chemical storage room in the sub-basement. That room was usually handled by a specialized hazmat team, but Charles Whitmore was doing a surprise building tour, and his supervisor was in a panic to make everything look perfect. Javier had asked for the proper safety gear, a respirator and reinforced gloves, but the supervisor scoffed. "There's no time for that, Javier. Just get it done." The fumes were overpowering. He'd started to feel dizzy, his vision blurring at the edges. He slipped on a small, unseen spill of solvent, and his arm had snapped with a sickening crunch as he fell against a metal shelf. Back at the office the next day, an unnatural quiet had settled over the maintenance department. The official story was already circulating. Whitmore's tour had been a resounding success. The incident with Javier was unfortunate, a case of employee negligence. Charles Whitmore himself had told Elena Marks in HR to manage the situation and keep it quiet. He would not let a janitor's carelessness tarnish his company's pristine safety record. That night, Maya sat at her small kitchen table, a cold fire of anger burning in her chest. This was not carelessness. This was a man's health being sacrificed for appearances. She opened her laptop. She knew that a direct complaint from Javier Lopez's daughter would be buried in paperwork and dismissed. She had to be smarter than that. Using a newly created anonymous email address, she sent a formal complaint directly to Elena Marks. She didn't write as a worried daughter, she wrote as a lawyer. She cited the specific OSHA regulations that had been violated, chapter and verse, Section 5A1, the General Duty Clause. She mentioned the company's legal duty to provide a safe work environment and the specific civil and criminal penalties for failing to do so. The email was precise, professional, and had the unmistakable authority of someone who knew the law inside and out. The next morning, her email caused a quiet explosion in the HR department. Elena Marks, shaken by the legal precision of the complaint, immediately demanded the security footage from the sub-basement. But an hour later, the official word came down from IT. The footage from that camera, from that exact time frame, had been mysteriously corrupted during a server update. It was gone. A few minutes later, Maya's desk phone rang with a sharp, insistent chirp. It was the CEO's personal assistant. Mr. Whitmore would like to see you in his office. Now! Maya took a slow, deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. The first move had been made. Now the game was truly beginning. It's awful to see a good man like Javier get hurt because of a heartless boss. How does this part of the story make you feel for Maya? And where are you all watching from today? Let us know down below. Charles Whitmore's office was on the top floor, a sprawling space with a panoramic view that seemed to command the entire city below. It was designed to make people feel small. He didn't ask Maya to sit. He stood by the massive window, his back to her, a silhouette of untouchable power against the skyline. Miss Lopez, he said, his voice as smooth and cold as the glass he was looking through. It has come to my attention that there has been a data leak. A very sensitive internal complaint, clearly designed to cause trouble, was sent to outside sources. Maya remained silent, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She knew he was talking about her email, but he had no proof, only suspicion. He turned to face her, his eyes narrowed into icy slits. You're the janitor's daughter, aren't you? Javier's girl. He said the word girl with a condescending bite. It's a terrible shame what happened to your father. A real shame. He paused, letting the silence stretch and fill the room. We take care of our family here, Maya. But some might say an accident like that would make a person desperate. Desperate enough to try and squeeze the company for a big payday. Maybe by fabricating a story, leaking false information to pressure us. I don't know what you're talking about, Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. Charles let out a soft, humorless chuckle. Of course you don't. He leaned against his desk, the picture of board authority. You see, I look at your file and I see a temp. Someone here today, gone tomorrow. It makes me wonder what your agenda is. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Elena, I have Miss Lopez here. Her temporary contract is terminated, effective immediately, for breach of company confidentiality. Please have security escort her out. Within minutes, Maya was walking back through the marble lobby, a silent, grim-faced security guard trailing a few feet behind her. This time, people didn't look through her, they stared. Whispers followed her like a shadow, sharp and cruel. That's the temp who tried to sue the company. The janitor's daughter. I heard she was a gold digger. Even a woman she'd shared coffee with just yesterday averted her eyes, pretending to be busy on her phone. The narrative Charles had crafted was spreading like a virus. She was isolated, fired, and her name was being dragged through the mud. Maya didn't defend herself. She didn't raise her voice or plead her case. Arguing would be like shouting into a storm. They had already passed judgment. She just kept her head held high, her face a mask of calm composure. As she was about to push through the glass revolving doors, Elena Marks, the HR head, rushed over. She looked pale and nervous, glancing over her shoulder at the security guard. I'm so sorry, Maya, she whispered, her eyes full of a conflict Maya understood all too well, the desire to do the right thing versus the mortal fear of losing your livelihood. My own father was a factory worker. He was injured and the company did nothing. I know what they do to people they think are unimportant. Elena pressed a small, plain flash drive into Maya's hand, closing her fingers over it. This contains the original, unedited incident reports from the last 5 years. There are others like your father's, Elena said, her voice barely audible. You didn't hear it from me. She turned and walked away before Maya could say a word. Maya looked down at the cool metal of the flash drive in her palm. It was a lifeline. A weapon. And it was all she had. Maya's apartment was a world away from the cold luxury of Whitmore Corporation. It was a small, neat space filled with second-hand furniture and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. On a shelf, nestled between thick legal textbooks on torts and corporate law, was a framed photograph. In it, a younger Maya stood beaming in a black cap and gown, holding a diploma. The words Harvard Law School were printed in elegant crimson lettering. She closed her eyes and the memory was as clear as day, the scratchy feel of the gown, the roar of the crowd, and her father's calloused hands, so used to holding a mop, now struggling to work the lens on a disposable camera. The pride in his eyes that day was the fuel that had carried her through everything. She took a deep breath, plugged the flash drive into her laptop, and a new fire lit within her. A treasure trove of files appeared on the screen. Dozens of incident reports, all officially marked resolved. As she read through them, a sickening pattern emerged. Minor injuries, safety complaints, reports of faulty equipment, all of them involved employees from low-level departments, maintenance, custodial, mailroom, cafeteria. The people who were as invisible as she had been. Each case was settled with a small, almost insulting, payout and a non-disclosure agreement that bound them to silence. She worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and a cold, focused anger. She cross-referenced the NDA language with the company's official policies, shareholder bylaws, and whistleblower protection laws. She muttered legal precedents to herself, her apartment transformed into a war room. Then in the early hours of the morning she found it. A legal loophole buried deep in the fine print of the employee handbook. It was a mandatory arbitration clause, written in such dense, impenetrable legalese that most people would sign it without a second thought. It essentially waived their right to a public court case, forcing them into a private, company-controlled settlement process. It was Charles Whitmore's secret weapon for burying his company's sins. It was clever, but it wasn't airtight. And she was about to drive a truck through the hole he'd left. Maya opened a new document. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, no longer with the hesitation of a temp, but with the deadly precision of a top-tier attorney. She drafted an official injunction, a legal filing to freeze all of Whitmore Corp's internal arbitration proceedings pending a full judicial review. She cited case law, federal statutes, and the overwhelming evidence of a systematic pattern of corporate malfeasance from the flash drive. She filed it electronically with the district court, requesting the case be put under a sealed name to protect the whistleblower. With her heart pounding, she hovered her mouse over the submit button. This was the point of no return. She clicked it. The declaration of war was sent. She's not just fighting back, she's building a case. If you love seeing the underdog get ready for a fight, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The tables are about to turn. The injunction landed like a digital bombshell inside the legal department of Whitmore Corporation. A junior lawyer saw it first and thought it was a prank. But it was real and it was devastating. Panic erupted. A surprise hearing was granted by the court for the very next day. Phones began ringing off the hook. Charles Whitmore was furious, storming through the legal wing, demanding answers. Who did this? Is it a rival? A fired executive? Find out who it is. His team of expensive lawyers scrambled, completely blindsided. They couldn't trace the anonymous filing, and they couldn't fathom who could craft such a perfect, lethal legal document. The idea that it came from the fire temp was too absurd to even consider. The next morning in a sterile wood-paneled courtroom, Charles sat with his legal team. He looked annoyed but projected an aura of unshakable confidence. This was just another nuisance, a fire to be put out with money and power. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Davies, called the case. We are here to hear the arguments regarding the injunction filed by the anonymous plaintiff against Whitmore Corporation. Will the plaintiff or their counsel please approach? The courtroom doors opened with a soft whoosh. A woman walked in, her heels clicking with a steady, resolute rhythm on the tiled floor. She wore a perfectly tailored black power suit, her hair pulled back in a neat, professional chignon. She carried a heavy leather briefcase as if it were an extension of her own arm. She was no longer a ghost in the background. She was the center of gravity in the room. It was Maya Lopez. She walked straight to the plaintiff's table and set down her briefcase with a quiet, definitive thud. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Charles Whitmore stared, his mouth hanging slightly open. His brain struggled to connect the image of the quiet, unremarkable temp from the cubicle with the formidable woman standing before him. The pieces clicked into place, but the picture they formed was utterly impossible. "You," he breathed, the single word thick with shock and disbelief. "Who in God's name are you?" Maya met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering and clear. The mask of the timid temp was gone, burned away to reveal the steel beneath. "You saw me every day, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice ringing with a calm clarity that filled the silent room. "You just never looked." She paused, letting the weight of her words land. "To answer your question, I'm the person who knows every law you broke." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a binder nearly 5 inches thick, placing it on the table with a solid, authoritative sound. She turned it to face the judge and the stunned opposing counsel. "And I'm the person who brought the proof." The binder was a masterpiece of legal preparation, with colored tabs marking each section. "For instance," she said, flipping to a tab marked Exhibit A, the safety gear requisition form for the chemical storage room, dated the day of my father's injury. It was denied by a supervisor who later admitted, in a sworn affidavit, that he was acting on your direct orders to prioritize appearances for your tour over employee safety. Charles's face went white. The trap he had so arrogantly set for her had just sprung shut on him. The news broke before the hearing was even over. Anonymous whistleblower unmasks widespread corruption at Whitmore Corporation. An enterprising court reporter had uncovered Maya's identity, and the story exploded. The narrative was irresistible: the Harvard lawyer janitor's daughter. It was on every news channel, every blog, every social media feed. Maya Lopez was no longer a name on a court document. She was a face on every screen, a modern-day David standing against a corporate Goliath. The board of directors at Whitmore Corp., who had been blissfully ignorant of Charles's quiet cover-ups, was in full-blown panic. Their stock was in a freefall. Their company's pristine reputation was in tatters. A flurry of frantic phone calls and emergency video conferences ensued. "He's a catastrophic liability," one board member spat. "Our brand is toxic overnight," said another. The loyalty Charles had commanded through fear and intimidation evaporated in the heat of public shame. They had to cut him loose and fast. In his hospital room, Javier Lopez watched the local news on a small television mounted to the wall. He saw his daughter, his Maya, standing on the courthouse steps, surrounded by a mob of reporters. She wasn't shouting or emotional. She was calm, composed, and powerful, speaking clearly about the moral and legal responsibility of corporations to protect their most vulnerable employees. She never mentioned him by name, but he knew. Every word was for him. He felt a tear slide down his weathered cheek, a feeling of pride so immense it felt like his heart would burst. "That's my girl," he whispered to the empty room. "She gets that fire from her mother." Inspired by Maya's courage, Elena Marks held a press conference of her own. With her voice trembling but her eyes resolute, she read a formal statement. "I was complicit through my silence, but Maya Lopez's courage has shown me that is no longer an option." Her words opened the floodgates. A mailroom clerk and another maintenance worker, both previously silenced by NDAs, came forward to share their stories with Maya's legal team. The wall of silence Charles had so carefully constructed was crumbling, brick by brick. A week later, the final blow landed. Based on the overwhelming evidence Maya had provided, evidence not only of safety violations but of financial fraud used to fund the secret settlements, Charles Whitmore was officially summoned to appear in court. He was facing a raft of criminal charges. The news report ended with a stunning announcement. The lead counsel for the class action civil suit against him would be none other than Maya Lopez. The biggest fight of his life would be against the woman he had dismissed as a nobody. The courtroom was a theater of justice, and it was sold out. Every seat was filled with reporters, former Whitmore employees, and members of the public who had been captivated by the story. Charles Whitmore sat at the defendant's table, looking shrunken and bitter in a suit that now seemed 2 sizes too big. His power had been stripped away, leaving only a hollow shell of arrogance. His lawyers, desperate, tried to muddy the waters. They portrayed Maya as a vengeful employee with a personal vendetta, a daughter scorned. During a cross-examination, their lead attorney tried to trap her. "Isn't it true, Ms. Lopez, that you were fired for leaking company information, a clear breach of your contract?" Maya met his gaze without flinching. "I was fired mere hours after anonymously reporting a federal safety violation that the company was actively concealing. I will let the members of the jury decide if that is a coincidence. When it was her turn to give her closing statement, she stood and faced the jury, but her words were meant for everyone. The opposing counsel claims I am acting out of emotion. They are not wrong, she began, her voice steady and resonant. This is deeply emotional, but it is not the emotion of vengeance. It is the emotion of watching a good man, my father, come home every night for 20 years with aching hands and a tired back, but always with a smile for his family. He taught me that honest work deserves dignity. He deserved better than to be treated as a disposable part of a machine. She looked directly at Charles. Mr. Whitmore saw a janitor's daughter and assumed I was simple. He saw my silence after he fired me and assumed I was afraid. He was wrong. I was silent because I was working. I was silent because my father also taught me that you don't win arguments by being the loudest person in the room. You win them by being the most prepared. You win by knowing the truth and having the facts to prove it. She turned back to the jury, her voice softening but losing none of its power. This case is not just about my father. It's about every person in this room who has ever felt invisible at work. It's about the idea that a person's worth is not defined by their job title, but by their character. The law is supposed to be a shield for those without power. Today, I ask you to lift that shield. When she finished, the courtroom was profoundly silent. The jury members looked not at the lawyers or the judge, but at Maya. They saw not a slick attorney, but a daughter fighting for her father's honor. Charles Whitmore looked utterly defeated, not by complex legal arguments, but by a simple, powerful truth he had long forgotten. The verdict, when it came, felt inevitable. He was found liable on all counts. The board officially removed him as CEO. Maya's civil suit would move forward, and she had won. The settlement was historic. Whitmore Corp, under a completely new leadership team, was desperate to rebuild its shattered reputation. After establishing a lifetime trust to cover her father's medical care and ensure he could retire in comfort and dignity, Maya did something that stunned the corporate world. She took a large portion of the remaining settlement and, in partnership with the company, established the Javier Lopez Fund for Worker Safety and Dignity, an independent body dedicated to providing free legal aid and advocacy for low-wage workers. A few weeks later, she visited her father at home. He was sitting on the porch of his small, tidy house, reading a book. He was out of the cast, and the lines of pain on his face had been replaced by a deep sense of peace. They sat together, sipping coffee as the sun went down. You know, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at her, your mother, she always said you had a fire in you. A sharp mind. She worried you get a fancy job and forget where you came from. But she always wanted you to use that mind to help people, not just to get rich. He smiled, his eyes twinkling. Look at you now. You did both. Maya leaned her head on his shoulder, the long, brutal fight finally over, leaving only a profound sense of peace. A month after that, Maya's phone rang. It was the new CEO of Whitmore Corp, a woman known for her ethical approach to business. She didn't just want to move on, she wanted to transform the company culture from the inside out. She offered Maya a permanent position as an in-house special counsel for ethics and employee welfare, with the authority to rewrite company policies from the ground up. The next Monday, Maya Lopez walked through the shining marble lobby of Whitmore Corp once again. But this time, she didn't wear a temp badge. This time, the people in expensive suits didn't look through her. They nodded respectfully, whispering, "Good morning, Ms. Lopez." She walked with a quiet confidence, not entering through a service entrance, but right through the front door. The final images of Maya standing in the corner office that was once Charles Whitmore's, a space she had insisted be converted into a collaborative workspace for her new team. She looks out the window at the sprawling city. She isn't thinking about the power or the prestige. She is thinking of a quiet promise she made to herself in a hospital waiting room, to make sure no one else ever felt as small as her father was made to feel. She was a guardian now, a protector. A quiet woman who had found her voice and would never, ever be underestimated again. It's always incredible to see justice served. If you love stories where the underdog comes out on top, check out the playlist in the comments below. We've put together some of our best revenge and justice stories just for you.